I'm Linda, 50 years old. I live peacefully with my husband, but a few years ago, our days were like a storm. It was about 10 years ago when my mother-in-law, who had been living alone, became bedridden. She tripped over a small step at the entrance of her home, fracturing her pelvis, which led to hospitalization. She underwent surgery twice, and her hospital stay dragged on for quite a while. Despite her declining lower body strength, she was reluctant to engage in rehabilitation. Nurses and physical therapists became increasingly frustrated, contacting her almost daily. No matter how much my husband and I tried to persuade her, she stubbornly refused to leave her bed. "You won't understand until you're in my shoes. Do you have any idea how frustrating it is when your body doesn't do what you want it to?" My mother-in-law, frustrated by her uncooperative body, frequently lashed out at those around her, and it was not uncommon to hear her shouting from her hospital room. Knowing that my words were futile, I asked my husband to patiently persuade her, but even he eventually gave up on our stubborn mother-in-law. "If you don't want to do it that badly, then don't." Both my mother-in-law and husband were equally stubborn, and once things reached this point, it became uncontrollable. Even when the doctor warned that she would become almost bedridden if things continued as they were, my mother-in-law seemed to have completely given up and showed no signs of being shaken. Moreover, she even expressed a desire to live with us once she became bedridden. In fact, my mother-in-law has no blood relation to my husband. She married my husband's father as his second wife and had been living with him as his stepson after her father-in-law passed away. Her motive for entering the family was wealth. However, her relationship with him soured, and it seemed she was resentful about not being able to inherit the estate successfully. I entered this family knowing this, but we lived separately. I wanted to avoid living with such a neurotic and selfish mother-in-law, even though it involved caregiving. I tried to persuade her patiently to undergo rehabilitation, but the situation remained unchanged. However, when I made the final suggestion of transferring her to a university hospital with a rehabilitation ward, my mother-in-law finally began to cooperate. The university hospital was a 1.5-hour drive from our home. I thought she would complain about not being able to visit her as easily as before, but surprisingly, she agreed quite easily. However, while she was being difficult, her muscle strength had deteriorated significantly, and the physical therapist told us that we needed to be patient and diligent. I was feeling quite frustrated as well. After 3 months of hospitalization, she was finally discharged. Although she was discharged, she had not recovered to the point where she could move her limbs freely as she did before. Living alone was not an option, so my husband and I discussed the possibility of her moving to a care facility. But my mother-in-law insisted on living with us. "Absolutely not going to a facility. Are you planning to abandon me?" My mother-in-law contacted various parties, claiming that we were trying to dump her into a facility. As a result, we were seen as villains. Relatives, uncles, and aunts repeatedly called, saying that my husband, as the eldest son, should take care of her properly. It was a typical move for my mother-in-law, who cared more about appearances than anything else, and I thought to myself. In order to keep her quiet, my husband did a lot of things. He installed a ramp at the entrance and purchased a high-performance care bed. We were confident that this would settle everything, but my mother-in-law uttered something unbelievable. "Since you're the daughter-in-law, you should take care of all my needs." My mother-in-law insisted that I take care of all her daily needs, which was impossible given that I have a job and it's simply not feasible to provide full-time care. To ensure that my mother-in-law could live without inconvenience, we needed the help of a home helper. Additionally, my husband's income alone couldn't support her. I couldn't quit my job to make ends meet. My husband explained this to her without sugarcoating it, but she remained obstinate. "I don't want to rely on strangers. What's wrong with asking you to fulfill your duties as a daughter-in-law? If she doesn't listen to my opinions, she threatens to spread rumors among the relatives that we are heartless." As soon as the word relatives is mentioned, my husband falls silent. And so, I found myself juggling work, childcare, and caregiving. To take care of my mother-in-law, I had to quit my job at the company where I had worked for a long time. I ended up working part-time at a nearby family restaurant. While my income took a significant hit, I had significantly more time to be with her since I had reduced my workload.
Hey! How long are you planning to keep me waiting? Bring the food already!
Whenever I'm at home, my mother-in-law is always noisy. If the meal preparation is even slightly delayed, she shouts and urges loudly, echoing throughout the house. Her meal demands are also quite detailed. The tea must be piping hot. She wants a variety of cuisines. There must be at least 2 vegetable dishes at every meal. Meat and fish must be strictly domestic. Despite her immobility, her appetite is normal, making it quite challenging. Perhaps because she has no other source of enjoyment, she refuses to compromise on meals. Even if the food is slightly cold, she demands it to be reheated, and if the menu she wants isn't served, she's perfectly fine with ordering a remake. Taking care of meals alone was already challenging, and taking care of her daily needs was no easier. She claimed she couldn't bathe alone, so I had to assist her with everything. She didn't want assistance with toileting, but whenever she called, no matter how busy I was, I had to take her to the bathroom. The room's air had to be refreshed multiple times a day, and cleaning had to be done daily. She insisted on changing the sheets and pillowcases every day. Room-dried clothes and bedding were absolutely not allowed. They had to be exposed to sunlight every day, and she would complain endlessly on days when laundry couldn't be dried due to rain. Honestly, I couldn't control the weather.
I wanted to scream, "Enough already," multiple times.
The most troublesome thing was taking her for rehabilitation once a week. A storm of complaints would start the day before. If I offered half-hearted responses, she would become grumpy and sometimes even refuse rehabilitation. Whether it was taking her there, during the rehabilitation, or after it was done, all she did was complain. Listening to it constantly, my mental state was on the verge of breaking down. I felt more and more cornered.
Both my husband and I repeatedly suggested hiring a home helper, but the answer was always a resounding no. Aren't you pained at all to entrust the care of a family member to strangers?
And so, we continued to work like servants under my mother-in-law's oppressive demands. However, when 5 years passed since my mother-in-law became bedridden, her attitude suddenly changed.
I've decided to rely on professionals for caregiving after all. Just give me the money.
The transformation in my mother-in-law, who had been so stubborn, left my husband and me puzzled. Still, I was overjoyed at the prospect of being even slightly relieved from her caregiving burden. My mother-in-law, who had suddenly become motivated, took care of all the arrangements for a home helper, and it was quickly settled. The expenses were deducted monthly from my mother-in-law's account, and I supplemented it by transferring the necessary amount every month. While it did cost money, we had caregiving insurance, and if I returned to full-time work as I did before, we could manage the payments. The home helper mostly came on weekdays, so I hardly ever crossed paths with my husband. My burden, both physically and mentally, decreased significantly, and I started to feel more at ease. Working outside also served as a stress relief. The home helper took her to the most challenging rehabilitation sessions, and for me, the home helper was nothing short of a savior. All I had to do was transfer money to my mother-in-law's account every month. But after 10 years of my mother-in-law being bedridden, a question arose in my mind. Despite hiring a home helper for several years, I had never once seen their presence. I didn't even know which facility they were from. I began to doubt whether the money was actually going to the home helper. When I discussed this with my husband, he strongly agreed and nodded repeatedly. While I was transferring the monthly expenses to my mother-in-law's account, I hadn't verified the actual withdrawals. My husband tried to check her bank book, but my mother-in-law stubbornly refused, saying it was a private matter.
"You're just planning to steal money from my account," she accused, turning away and ultimately preventing any investigation.
We tried to contact the home helper, but we didn't even have their contact information. As suspicions grew, my husband made a suggestion. "Let's find out if the home helper is really coming." After returning from work, my husband bought a small camera. That night, after confirming that my mother-in-law was sound asleep, my husband and I placed cameras in various locations throughout the house. And the recorded footage from the cameras was quite shocking. After we left for work, my mother-in-law would get up from her bed as if nothing was wrong. She stretched, loosened her neck and shoulders, then calmly walked out of her room. After a while, she would return, holding ice cream in her hands. We were left speechless as we watched her sit on the bed and eat ice cream heartily. She walked around the house, took baths by herself, and even heard the sound of the front door opening. She must have gone out. When she returned 30 minutes later, she was carrying supermarket shopping bags in both hands. They were filled with a large quantity of snacks. She surreptitiously hid them in the back of the closet, trying not to be found by us, which was quite comical. It seemed that during the day when we were not around, she would behave just as before, and as soon as we returned home, she would act as if she were physically impaired.
What is this? What is going on here?
My husband and I muttered simultaneously. My mother-in-law's body had completely healed. I wondered how she could suddenly walk despite not seriously engaging in rehabilitation, but she was walking nonetheless. Seeing her energetic appearance on the screen in front of me, the anger I had been suppressing for so long began to boil inside me. I couldn't stay silent, I needed to confront my mother. My husband felt the same way. One evening, my husband came home on time, and together we executed a plan. We bought a TV for my mother-in-law, which we had given to her so she wouldn't get bored. She usually watched the news with the TV on loud volume in the evenings. On that day, as soon as the news started playing loudly from my mother-in-law's room, we seized the opportunity and used a multifunctional remote control to manipulate the TV. She was startled by the sudden change on the screen, but the real show was about to begin. She appeared to be speechless when she saw herself walking around the house on the screen. We had devised a plan to make her talk by showing her all the footage recorded by the small cameras. My mother-in-law attempted to turn off the TV with the remote control, but I also had a multifunctional remote control and promptly turned it back on. She continued to switch it off and on, but eventually, my mother-in-law, unable to resist any longer, glared at me.
Hey! Give me that remote control!
Well, if you want it, you can come and get it. After all, you can walk, can't you? I turned the TV back on, projecting her image. The high-performance camera also recorded audio, capturing her cheerful humming. The recorded footage showed her comfortable lifestyle, and my mother-in-law seemed to be at a loss for words. She stubbornly continued to turn it off, but when my husband took the remote control away, she finally couldn't resist anymore.
If you don't want to see it that badly, then why don't you walk over to the TV yourself and turn it off, my husband said, glaring at her.
Pale-faced, my mother-in-law cautiously got up, looking back at us as if gauging our reactions, and slowly walked toward the TV. I had been deliberately dragging my feet as I walked, but it was now too late, and it seemed forced. As I stared at her with a cold gaze, she quietly turned off the TV's main power. The room fell silent. She seemed to be racking her brain for some excuse, but it seemed that no solution came to mind. She slowly sat down on the floor and bowed vigorously towards us. I'm sorry. It was the first time I had seen my mother-in-law bow like that. However, her apology was accompanied by just a few words, and the rest seemed like a string of excuses.
When my husband firmly said, "Explain yourself quickly," my mother-in-law, trembling, began to explain how she regained her ability to walk.
In fact, when she started rehabilitation, her legs were already strong enough, and within a few days, her recovery was so miraculous that she could walk normally in a week. However, if she fully recovered, she would have to return to living on her own. So, she had been pretending to be disabled in order to live with us and enjoy a life of ease. She also refused rehabilitation to reduce the number of post-discharge hospital visits, making it seem like it was because she was a stubborn person. I sighed at her shallow and selfish thinking. She admitted that she just wanted to relax at home. Initially, she had taken advantage of me and my willingness to provide care, but she had grown tired of my dedicated caregiving efforts. She had lied about hiring a caregiver and instead pocketed the money we gave her for her own enjoyment. She confessed that most of that money had been spent on various social games like dating simulations and music games. It was far more than what I contributed, and she even used her own pension. She had told the doctors that she could walk due to the results of her training and expressed her desire to hire a caregiver a few days later, then abruptly stopped rehabilitation. Since we were taking care of all her living expenses, she must have thought she could use all her money without any problems. For 10 years, she had taken advantage of me and enjoyed a comfortable life while making me work tirelessly. We couldn't forgive her.
"Please leave now," my husband said, and I nodded in agreement. "You can walk normally now, and you can even take a bath on your own. You can go shopping by yourself. We don't need to take care of you anymore. We're ending this cohabitation."
With her head down, my mother-in-law suddenly looked up and her eyes welled with tears.
"Please, let me stay here as it is. My family home has already been demolished and the land sold. I can't live on my own now. Please, I'll cooperate with everything in the house."
Despite her transparent desire for financial and physical convenience, my mother-in-law continued to cling to us. However, our determination remained unaltered.
"Leave within a week," my husband said and left her room.
I tried to follow suit, but my mother-in-law hurriedly grabbed my arm.
"Please, wait. You'll be on my side, won't you? I admit we haven't gotten along in the past, but a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, it's not supposed to be like that. Let's get along from now on. I'll cooperate with everything in the house."
Did she still not realize that she was the cause of all the troubles and our inability to get along?
I brushed her hand aside and said quietly, "Mother, you told me before, didn't you? You didn't want to rely on others. I'm your daughter-in-law, but I'm practically a stranger to you. Could you stop acting like we're a family only when it's convenient for you?"
My cold words made my mother-in-law slowly crumble. Without looking back, I walked away. Afterwards, my mother-in-law made no effort to prepare for her move, and my husband, losing patience, started packing her belongings. His determination was overwhelming, and my mother-in-law couldn't offer any resistance. She hastily rented a small apartment, but living solely on her pension would be quite challenging. The money from selling the house was likely depleted, mostly squandered on frivolous social games, leaving hardly anything left. She seemed to be seeking help from those around her, but her attempts were in vain. Everyone was repulsed by her 10 years of pretending to be disabled, as she had shown that secretly recorded video to various people. No one was willing to lend a hand. My husband demanded the return of the living expenses she had fraudulently obtained during the 10 years of pretending to be disabled, as well as the money meant for the caregiver. She initially tried to evade this responsibility, but when we mentioned taking legal action, she fell silent. Now, she works as a cleaner in the early morning and at a factory during the day, earning her living expenses. For 10 years, she had pretended to be disabled, freely using our time and money. The consequences of her actions must be weighing heavily on her. She had sought to marry her husband for his inheritance and deceive her son and daughter-in-law for an easy life, leading to this pitiful end. We have finally reclaimed a peaceful daily life after 10 years. In the future, even if my mother-in-law genuinely requires care, we have no intention of extending a helping hand. Well, with her cunning, I'm sure she'll stay healthy and live a long life ahead.